Did you even read the dress code? The VP's daughter sneered on her first day, waving the handbook. You're fired. In the lobby, the $3 billion investor hugged me. Ready to sign the merger? He asked, his voice smooth and confident. I smiled. Sorry, she just fired me. No deal. He turned to her with cold eyes. You did what? It wasn't the first time I had been underestimated. In fact, it had become an art form. But today, the sting of her words was different. It wasn't just the fact that Cassidy, the newly appointed VP's daughter, had barged into my space with her high heels, clicking like the sound of an alarm. It was how quickly everything had spiraled, how the arrogance of a newcomer could destroy years of calculated strategy in a single moment. I hadn't planned for this. I had been standing by the floor, to ceiling windows, tablet in hand, reviewing the final clauses of a deal that could change everything. The hum of the air conditioning had filled the room, a soft drone of corporate life. The smell of lemon polish and cool, recirculated air clung to the office. I'd spent the past 9 months working tirelessly, shaping raw data into something beautiful, into a merger worth billions. The power in that room had always been mine. But now, here she was, Cassidy, making it all feel like a game. Her entrance wasn't just an interruption. It was an invasion. She walked in as if she owned the place, all confidence and no substance. At 24, fresh out of some Ivy League MBA program, her father had probably paid a small fortune for. She wasn't interested in what I had built. She wasn't interested in the merger that had taken months to arrange. No. She was here to make a point. And in her mind, firing me over a stupid dress code violation was her way of making it. She wasn't wrong about one thing. I was wearing vintage Armani. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with pearl buttons that looked exquisite. But apparently, those buttons weren't standardized. According to the company handbook, an outdated relic from the 90s. Her voice cut through the hum of the office like a serrated knife, demanding I explain myself. I had no patience for her games. Can I help you, Cassidy? I asked, keeping my voice level. I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't even bothered. But my mind was racing. You're violating Code 4. Section B, she announced, tapping her manicured finger against the old, thick employee handbook. You're in violation of dress code. I blinked. Really? This was how she was going to start. The handbook, of course, was irrelevant. It was the power play that stung. The way she held it up like a weapon. Like she had a right to dismantle everything I had built. She wasn't looking at me like an equal, no. She was looking at me like I was a threat. And that threat, in her mind, had to be crushed immediately. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to prove she was in charge. Trying to establish dominance on her first day. Just by taking down the woman who had been here for years. But I wasn't just some junior analyst she could push around. I'm sorry. I said slowly, my voice dropping, cutting through the tension in the room. The pearl buttons. Cassidy nodded, her lips curling into a smirk as she crossed her arms. The handbook clearly states standardized closures only. And that bag. She waved dismissively at my leather tote. It's distressed. We don't do distressed here. We represent excellence. The room had gone dead silent. The analysts in the cubicles, the junior associates who had been working on their laptops, all paused to watch the show. No one said a word. It was the kind of tension you could feel in your bones. The kind of silence that preceded something big. I took a deep breath. Cassidy was pushing me. She was testing me to see if I would break. And I wasn't going to. Not now. Not after all the work I had put into this. I'm meeting with Marcus Sterling in 48 hours to finalize a $3 billion acquisition, I said, my voice cool and steady. This blazer is not the issue. The issue is that you are interrupting my preparation. She flushed a bright shade of red, the color creeping up her neck and into her cheeks. She wasn't used to being challenged. And she wasn't used to someone not immediately crumbling at the weight of her title. Her eyes narrowed. I am the Vice President's Chief of Staff, she declared, her tone turning colder, as if throwing around that title somehow gave her the right to make demands. If you can't follow the basic rules of this company, how can we trust you with its future? I couldn't help but let out a breath. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh. The fact that she was trying to lecture me on rules, when she didn't even understand the deal we were working on, it was almost comical. But I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I simply turned back to the window, refocusing on my tablet. No, I said simply. The word was sharp, final. She wasn't expecting it. She wasn't expecting resistance. Excuse me, she demanded. You're fired, she said, her voice shrill. The room went still. The silence was deafening. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her. You can't be serious, I said. I am your superior by proxy, and you are insubordinate. The words seemed to hit her like a brick. She wasn't prepared for the pushback. She wasn't prepared for me to stand my ground. Pack your things, she shrieked, her voice cracking with frustration. Security will escort you out. I looked at the analysts in the glass cubicles. They were watching me. Some with fear in their eyes. Some with curiosity. Everyone was waiting for me to respond. To break. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I turned back to my tablet, shutting it with a snap. The deal was almost done. Cassidy's face was flushed. She thought she had won. She had no idea she had just handed me everything I needed to bring this empire to its knees. I turned to her and gave her a look. One last glance. A smile that didn't reach my eyes. Okay, I said. Okay. She echoed, her voice wavering with confusion. Standards are important, I said, snapping my tablet shut. I'll pack my things immediately. I walked past her. My shoulder brushed hers as I made my way toward the door. Cassidy didn't move. She stood there, staring at me, still processing what had just happened. She thought she had just taken down the matriarch of the office. She had no idea that she had just set the fuse for a bomb that wouldn't explode for 48 hours. The elevator doors slid shut behind me, and I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the hall settle around me. The adrenaline of the confrontation was still buzzing in my veins, but beneath it, there was a strange sense of clarity. I had been fired. It should have been a blow, but instead, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I hadn't realized how much of my energy had gone into maintaining control, how much I had buried beneath my professional armor. As I walked down the hall toward my office, I felt the familiar hum of the building, the soft whir of the fluorescent lights above, and the muted buzz of phones and keyboards. But it was all distant now. I was no longer part of this world, at least not in the way I had been before. The office was still, as if the air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't until I stepped inside that I realized how much the space had come to define me. My desk was a landscape of controlled chaos. Stacks of documents. Legal pads filled with shorthand only I could decipher. And a sleek leather binder that contained everything I needed to navigate the merger. It was a world I had built with my own hands. Every deal, every contract, every negotiation leading to this moment. And now, it was all about to slip away. I moved to my desk slowly, as if savoring the finality of it. My fingers hovered over the papers, but I didn't touch them. Instead, I opened the drawer and took out the personal items I had left behind over the years. A framed photo of my father, a crystal paperweight Marcus Sterling had given me after a successful deal in Tokyo, and the Rolodex. I dropped it into my tote bag with a satisfying thud. The weight of the decision was starting to sink in. I had nothing to lose anymore. But that didn't mean I would act rashly. I wasn't done here yet. My assistant, Sarah, was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, her hands wringing a tissue, like she was trying to hold herself together. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Emily, is it true? Did she really?" I nodded. "It's true, Sarah. Cassidy fired me." Her face fell, but she didn't ask anything else. She knew the stakes. She had watched me climb to this point, seen the way I worked, how every move I made was calculated, how every risk I took had a purpose. But now, she saw the calmness in me, the absence of panic. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I was already thinking ahead, planning the next move. I took a deep breath and looked around the office one last time. It was almost absurd how little it meant to me now. This space had been my battleground, my refuge. But now, it felt like a relic, a place I no longer belonged. I closed my laptop, not out of haste, but with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Do you need anything?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice trembling. She wasn't asking for herself. She was asking for me, for the woman she had always seen as unshakable. I shook my head. "No, I'm fine." She didn't believe me, but she nodded anyway. I gathered a few more items, nothing too personal, just the essentials. A few contracts, a couple of pens, a file I would need for the next stage of my plan. I didn't need anything else. I was done here. I stood up, and as I walked past Sarah, I paused for a moment. "I'll let you know what happens next. Keep the team focused." She nodded. But her eyes were still wide with uncertainty. She had no idea what was coming next, and honestly, neither did I. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I had a plan, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially Cassidy, get in my way. As I stepped into the hallway, I could feel the eyes of the analysts, the junior associates, all on me. They were watching me, waiting for some sign of weakness. They wouldn't get it. I wasn't about to give them that. I walked straight to the elevator without looking back. The doors slid open, and I stepped inside, my heart steady. As the elevator descended, I didn't think about what I was leaving behind. I didn't think about the deal, or the merger, or the company I had spent so many years building. Instead, I thought about what was coming next. The phone call I would make. The strings I would pull. The deal I would finish. The people who would regret underestimating me. By the time I reached the ground floor, the building seemed smaller, more insignificant. I stepped out into the sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. The cool air brushed against my skin, and I walked toward the street, feeling lighter with every step. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. I had all the time in the world now. I stopped at a cafe a few blocks away, ordered a double espresso, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't reach for it. I wanted to enjoy this moment of calm before the storm. There was a part of me that knew, deep down, that things were going to get messy. But I also knew that I was ready for it. As I sipped my coffee, I glanced at the digital clock on my phone. It was only 10:30. By noon, things would start to unravel. By 2, the real chaos would begin. And by tomorrow, the board would be scrambling. I smiled to myself. Let them. They had no idea what was coming. I stayed there for an hour, watching the people on the street, feeling the tension in the air, knowing that by the end of the day, my life would be on a completely different path. But for now, I was content to watch the world move around me. I had earned this moment of peace. When I finally decided it was time, I stood up, grabbed my tote bag, and walked out of the cafe. There was a job to be done, and I wasn't going to waste any more time. But before I left, I turned off my phone. I didn't need to be reachable. Not yet. Not until the right moment. Everything was in motion now, and there was no turning back. I spent the next few hours walking around the city, trying to clear my mind. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky as I sat in a quiet park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath my boots. My phone remained off, buzzing with unanswered notifications. For once, I didn't care. The weight of the day had been lifted, and I was finally alone with my thoughts. Alone. With the realization that I had just set the stage for something much bigger. When I finally decided to check my phone, it was nearly 6 in the evening. I had no idea how long I'd been sitting there, but it felt like a lifetime. A flurry of missed calls greeted me, mostly from Sarah. But the one that caught my attention was a message from Marcus Sterling himself. "Are you free to talk? This is Marcus. I need to speak with you." I didn't hesitate. I tapped on his name and called back. The phone rang twice before his deep voice filled the line. "Emily," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I need your help. This situation. It's much worse than I thought." I leaned back against the bench, feeling the weight of his words settle in. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic. I could feel my heart rate slow. Marcus Sterling, the man I'd worked with for years, was reaching out to me. The man whose $3 billion deal Cassidy had so carelessly jeopardized. What happened? I asked, my voice steady but filled with quiet anticipation. "Cassidy." Marcus sighed. "She's completely mismanaged the situation. The board doesn't have a clue what they're doing. They're trying to cover it up. But I can see right through it. The merger is in serious jeopardy. And if we don't act fast, it's all going to fall apart." I closed my eyes for a moment, processing his words. This was bigger than just a corporate scandal. This was about power, about control, about everything I had built coming crashing down because of one person's reckless actions. "I'm listening," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mind was already running through possibilities, formulating a plan. "I'm pulling out," Marcus said bluntly. "I've already contacted my legal team. But I need you to help me salvage what's left. The merger can still be saved. But it needs someone who understands the real details. The nuance behind the numbers. Someone who isn't blinded by their own ambition." He paused, and for a moment, I could hear the weight of his words. "I can't do this without you, Emily. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. The stakes were high, higher than they had ever been before. But this wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. I stood up, feeling the cold night air against my skin as I walked away from the park. My steps were steady now, confident. This was my chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. "I'm in," I said, my voice firm. "But we're going to need more than just a plan. We need leverage." "I'm already working on it," Marcus replied. "I'll have my team set everything in motion. But we need to move quickly. Time is running out." I ended the call and tucked my phone back into my bag. The city was alive around me, but for the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity. Cassidy had fired me, thinking she had control. She had no idea what kind of fire she was playing with. I had nothing left to lose. And everything to gain. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was dark. The quiet hum of the city below me felt distant now, almost irrelevant. I made my way inside, the door clicking shut behind me as I moved toward my desk. The Rolodex was still in my bag, the last piece of leverage I had left. I opened the drawer, pulling it out carefully. There, in my hands, was the key to everything, the private number to Marcus Sterling's personal phone. The number I had promised never to use. The number that could destroy everything if it fell into the wrong hands. I stared at the piece of paper for a long moment. This wasn't just about saving a merger. This was about proving that I could outsmart them all. Prove that Cassidy had made the biggest mistake of her life when she crossed me. I stood up, feeling a surge of determination flood my veins. I wasn't going to be just another corporate casualty. I was going to take back control. I dialed the number. It rang twice before the familiar voice on the other end answered. "This is Marcus," he said, his voice cool and composed. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady. "It's Emily. We need to talk." The evening passed slowly, the hours ticking by in a blur as I sat in my apartment, the weight of my decision settling over me. I had taken control, but the consequences of what I was about to do still hung in the air. Thick and heavy. The phone call with Marcus had been the first step, but I knew the real work was just beginning. It wasn't enough to have his trust. I had to move quickly, decisively, and ensure that Cassidy's reckless actions would come back to haunt her. The city outside my window hummed with life, but inside, everything was quiet. The lights were dim. The only sound the soft rustle of papers, and the occasional hum of my refrigerator. My mind kept returning to that moment in the boardroom. The moment when Cassidy had barged in with her self-righteous attitude, thinking she could take me down with a few words. It was almost laughable. How little she understood the world she was playing in. I poured myself a glass of wine, swirling it gently in my hand. The bitterness of the tannins matched the bitterness I was feeling inside. I had spent years building my career, navigating a world that demanded perfection, that required me to be flawless at all times. And now, in an instant, Cassidy had tried to destroy it. But she didn't realize the game she was playing. She didn't understand that for someone like me, the only way to win was to rise from the ashes of defeat. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Sarah. "Emily, are you okay? The office is. It's chaotic. I think they're trying to cover it up. Legal is in a meeting. The board's freaking out about the deal." I didn't respond right away. There was no point. Sarah was as much in the dark as everyone else. The chaos she mentioned was nothing compared to what was coming. But I had to admit, it felt good to know that the wheels were already in motion, that the plan was taking shape. I glanced at the clock. It was nearing midnight. Tomorrow was the day. I had to be ready for whatever came next. The last thing I needed was to appear vulnerable in front of the people who thought they could control me. No. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I stood up and walked over to my desk, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. The Rolodex was still in my bag, its weight a reminder of the leverage I held. I opened it, my fingers brushing over the pages, stopping at the name I had been looking for. The private number to Marcus's personal phone. The key to everything. I closed the Rolodex and dropped it back into my bag, then turned to face the window. The skyline outside was familiar, but now it seemed distant, like it no longer belonged to me. I had outgrown this world. I was ready for something new. The phone buzzed again, this time a call from Marcus. I didn't hesitate to answer. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "I've already started talking to my legal team. We're pulling out of the deal with Sterling Hart. But I need you to do something for me." I felt the surge of anticipation flood through me. This was the moment, the turning point. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice calm, focused. "We're going to need to reposition this whole thing. The board's going to resist. They'll try to cover up their mistakes. But you know better than anyone how much leverage we have. The Sterling family's trust. The Montana assets. They're critical, and they're the key to everything." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I know. I've got the files. But Cassidy thinks she's in control. She's the one who's going to make the mistake." "Exactly. We're going to let her think she's in control, until the last possible moment. By the time she realizes what she's done, it'll be too late." I took a deep breath, my pulse quickening. This was it. This was the game I had been playing all along, and I was finally in a position to win. "I'm in," I said, my voice steady. "But we need to move fast. The clock's ticking." Marcus paused for a moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "We'll meet in the morning. I've already made arrangements. Be ready." The call ended, and I put the phone down with a calm resolve. Tomorrow would be the day everything changed. Tomorrow, I would take back everything that had been stolen from me. But as I sat there in the silence of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Cassidy had made a fatal mistake, and now, she would learn just how costly it was to underestimate me. I walked over to the window, staring out at the city that seemed so small now. I wasn't just playing the game anymore. I was changing the rules. And no one was going to stop me. I finished my wine in one long sip, and set the glass down. There was work to do, and I wasn't about to waste any more time. Tomorrow, I would take back control. Tomorrow, the world would finally see who I really was. And Cassidy. She was going to learn the hard way. The morning arrived too quickly, but I didn't mind. There was something about the urgency of the situation that made me feel alive. Like the world was shifting around me, and I was in the driver's seat. I stood in front of my closet, pulling out a new suit, a sharp black number with gold buttons that felt like it had been waiting for this moment. The blazer fit perfectly, its sleek lines making me feel invincible. I wasn't going to let anything, least of all Cassidy's petty power play, stand in my way today. As I buttoned up the jacket, My mind wandered to the events of the past few days. The morning I had been fired felt like a lifetime ago. I had expected to feel anger, perhaps regret, but instead, I felt a calm sense of clarity. Cassidy thought she had won, thought she had made the right move. But she had no idea what she was up against. I wasn't just a cog in their corporate machine. I was the architect of their success, and now I was about to make sure they paid for their mistake. I took a deep breath and checked the time. It was 8:30. My meeting with Marcus was scheduled for 9, but I wasn't going to rush. I wasn't just getting ready for a corporate battle. I was preparing for a personal victory. The phone rang as I was finishing up my makeup. Marcus. I smiled to myself and answered quickly. Good morning, I said, keeping my tone calm, confident. Emily. Marcus's voice was steady, but there was a sense of urgency underneath. We're going to need to move quickly today. The board's expecting us, and they're already on edge. I've got my legal team on standby, but we can't afford any more mistakes. I'm ready, I replied, my voice unwavering. I'll be there shortly. I hung up and grabbed my bag, the weight of the Rolodex, still sitting in it, like a reminder of everything I had built. I wasn't just going to walk into that boardroom, as a fired employee. I was going in as the woman who could save this deal. And more importantly, save the Sterling family from their own incompetence. The city was alive outside my window as I left my apartment. The streets buzzing with the usual morning chaos. I hailed a cab and settled into the back seat, feeling the anticipation build in my chest. I had to admit, there was a certain thrill in knowing that the game was about to change. I had spent so many years playing by their rules, but now, I was rewriting them. The Sterling deal had been my masterpiece, and I wasn't about to let Cassidy, or anyone else, take credit for it. The drive to the Sterling Heart building felt like it took forever, though I knew it was only a few miles. My eyes stayed focused ahead, but my mind was racing through every detail, every contingency. I had already set things in motion. Cassidy would never know what hit her. As the car pulled up to the towering glass building, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it. There was no turning back now. I stepped out of the cab and walked toward the entrance with a calm, measured pace, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Inside, the air was cool, the lighting bright and harsh, the hustle of the office almost palpable. Everyone was pretending to work, but I could feel the tension in the air. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. I made my way to the elevator, my thoughts racing. By the time the doors slid open and I stepped inside, I could almost hear the whispers in the hallway. I wasn't just going to face the board today. I was about to face a world that had underestimated me for far too long. As the elevator ascended, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished doors. The woman staring back at me was calm, controlled, and ready for whatever came next. She wasn't angry. She wasn't fearful. She was determined. The elevator chimed, signaling my arrival on the top floor. I stepped out, my heart steady in my chest. The conference room doors were just ahead, and I could hear the faint murmur of voices inside. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. This was my moment. I was going to take back everything that had been taken from me. I pushed the doors open and walked inside, my gaze immediately locking with Marcus's. He was already seated at the head of the table, his eyes sharp and calculating, as always. The board members were all there, their faces tense, their gazes flicking between me and Marcus. "Good morning," I said coolly, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I didn't wait for anyone to speak. I wasn't here for pleasantries. I was here to make sure they knew who was in charge. "Emily," Marcus said, standing and giving me a small nod. "We've been discussing the situation, and I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." I could feel Cassidy's presence in the corner of the room, standing there like a child in a power suit. She hadn't expected me to walk in with my head held high, to show no signs of weakness. She had expected me to cower. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. "Cassidy," I said, turning my attention to her. "I hear you've been making decisions on behalf of the company. I hope you've had the chance to read the fine print of the deal." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't respond. The board was watching her now, waiting for her to defend herself, but I could see the panic creeping into her expression. She hadn't prepared for this. She hadn't prepared for me. "Emily," the CFO said, his voice strained. "We need to focus on the merger. The deal's not dead yet. We just need to get the board back on track." I turned to him, my expression hardening. "The deal is as good as dead unless you understand exactly what's at stake here. You've been playing at corporate strategy, but this isn't a game. If you don't get this right, you'll lose everything. And I mean everything." The room fell silent, the tension thick. The weight of my words hung in the air, and I could see the board members exchanging uneasy glances. They knew it too. They knew the deal was on the edge of falling apart, and they knew that I was the only one who could fix it. I turned back to Cassidy, meeting her eyes for the first time since I had walked in. She was trembling, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. The arrogant smirk she had worn when she fired me was long gone. In its place was uncertainty, a stark contrast to the confidence she had shown just days ago. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "You made a mistake, Cassidy. And now, you're going to learn the consequences." She swallowed hard, but I could see the fear in her eyes. And I knew, right then, that this was my victory. The board would see it. Marcus would see it. And Cassidy. She would be the one left in the dust. The room was still as Marcus's words hung in the air. The board members shifted in their seats, unease palpable on their faces. The silence was thick with tension as I let my words sink in. They were starting to realize that this wasn't just about a dress code violation or a power struggle between Cassidy and me. This was about control. The control I had once held over this company. And the control I was taking back. Cassidy had been the first to make a move, firing me as if she could erase everything I had built. But I wasn't just some casualty of corporate politics. I was the one who knew the deals, who understood the nuances, who knew the Sterling family's legacy, and how to preserve it. And now, with every word, I was reminding them of what they stood to lose. "Emily's right," Marcus finally said, his voice carrying a cold authority. "This merger isn't just about numbers on a page. It's about relationships. About trust." He turned to the board, his gaze sharp. "And right now, I don't trust any of you to make the right decisions." The words hit harder than I expected. I watched the board members squirm in their chairs, each of them trying to pretend they weren't part of the mess that Cassidy had created. But it was too late. The truth was out, and they all knew it. I didn't need to say anything more. My role was already set. I was the expert, the insider, the one who had the answers. And as the room settled into silence, I realized how much power I had in this moment. Not just in the deal, but over the narrative. I was shaping the story, controlling the direction. And I wasn't going to let anyone, especially Cassidy, take that from me. The board meeting dragged on, discussions turning to damage control. But I wasn't listening. I was already thinking ahead, already preparing for what came next. I knew the stakes. I knew that every move I made now would determine the future of this company. And my future. I left the meeting with Marcus, just as the room was beginning to stir again, their voices rising in anxious chatter. It was clear they still didn't fully understand the magnitude of the situation. They had underestimated me. And now, they would have to deal with the consequences. The hallway was quiet as we walked out of the conference room, the doors clicking shut behind us. Marcus turned to me, his face unreadable. "Good job," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't over. We still have work to do." I nodded, but I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. The game had shifted, and now I was in control. Marcus wasn't the only one who had leverage here. I had mine too. And I wasn't going to waste it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and calls. The board scrambled to put out the fires that Cassidy had started. But it was clear that the damage had been done. By the time I left the office, the weight of the day was starting to settle in. I had made my move. I had taken back control. But the real work was just beginning. As I got into the cab and made my way home, I couldn't help but replay the events in my mind. Cassidy had thought she was in charge. She thought she could dictate the terms of this deal. But she had no idea what she was up against. And now, she was about to learn the hard way. The next few days were a blur of meetings with Marcus and his team, working to reshape the deal and fix the damage that had been done. But every time I thought about Cassidy, a cold satisfaction settled in my chest. She was losing everything. And I was watching it happen, knowing that I had set it all in motion. By the time the weekend came, things had begun to settle. The board had made some concessions, agreeing to the new terms we had laid out. The Sterling deal was back on track, thanks to me. I had saved it, pulled it back from the brink. And in the process, I had reclaimed my power. But the real test was yet to come. I knew that Cassidy wouldn't go down without a fight. She had too much to prove, too much at stake. But I wasn't worried. I had already won. The question now was how much more I was willing to take from her. The next morning, I woke up early, a sense of calm settling over me. The fight was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. Cassidy had fired me. But now, I was in control. And she would be the one who had to answer for her mistakes. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of my new suit, and smiled. This was just the beginning. The following days passed in a blur of controlled chaos. I was back at Sterling Holdings, stepping into my new role with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where the power lay. Marcus had made sure the transition was smooth, but I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I was already in control. Every move I made, every email I sent, carried the weight of someone who had learned to play the game and understood the stakes. The board, still reeling from the chaos Cassidy had caused, was looking to me to steer the ship. And I would. But not without making sure the pieces were in place. I had to admit, I wasn't surprised by Cassidy's reaction. She was desperate to maintain her grip on power, still clinging to the illusion that she could fix everything with her daddy's influence. But that was her mistake. She was too focused on what she thought she knew, and too blind to see what was really happening around her. It didn't take long for the first cracks in her facade to show. I saw it in her eyes when she passed me in the hallway, her hurried steps faltering for just a second. She was playing at being in control, but the unease was there. She had no idea how badly she had messed up, and it was only a matter of time before everyone else saw it too. But Cassidy wasn't my problem anymore. The real test was how much longer Marcus was willing to let her play her part in this. The deal was still in motion, and despite everything, I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Marcus. Hello. I answered, my voice calm, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation. Emily? He said, his tone unreadable. We need to talk. There's a problem. My pulse quickened. What kind of problem? The board isn't happy with the changes you've been making. They're pushing back on some of the terms we've discussed. They want more control, more influence. They're starting to question your involvement. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a slight knot form in my stomach. This was exactly what I had expected. They weren't going to give up their power easily. But what they didn't realize was that their power was only real because I let them think it was. They don't get it, I said quietly, my voice steady. The terms were non-negotiable. They can either get on board or get left behind. You know this deal is mine to save. I know, Marcus said. But they're not going to back down without a fight. I need you to be ready for whatever comes next. If we want this deal to happen, we'll need to put some real pressure on them. I could almost hear the weight of his words, the subtle hint of desperation in his voice. He needed me. And I wasn't about to let him down. Tell me what to do, I said, the words coming out almost instinctively. I had already made up my mind. There was no turning back now. If they wanted control, they would have to fight for it. But they wouldn't be fighting against me. They would be fighting against their own mistakes. I'll have my team pull together the leverage files, Marcus said. We'll meet tomorrow. I want to be sure we have every angle covered. You'll need to be ready. I'm always ready, I replied, my confidence unwavering. I'll be there. The line went silent for a moment before he spoke again. Good. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The pieces were falling into place. Cassidy had made her move, but now it was my turn. I wasn't just going to win this deal. I was going to reshape the entire game. The next morning came too quickly, but I didn't mind. I was already mentally prepared for what lay ahead. The air in the office felt different today, charged with a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. The walls seemed to hum with an energy that matched my own. Every step I took felt calculated, every decision sharp. I passed Cassidy in the hallway again. She was talking to someone on the phone, her voice raised, just enough to be heard across the room. When she saw me, she froze for just a moment, her eyes locking with mine. I could see the desperation in her expression, the thin veneer of confidence cracking just slightly. She knew she was losing control. I didn't acknowledge her. There was no point. Cassidy wasn't the one I needed to worry about anymore. I entered the conference room where Marcus was waiting, the door clicking softly behind me. His face was a mask of composure, but I could tell he was feeling the pressure. The board was pushing harder, and now, we had to push back. "You're ready, right?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. I nodded. "I'm ready." "Good. Let's do this." The door to the boardroom opened, and we walked inside, the air thick with tension. The board members were already seated, their eyes flicking to me as I entered, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't here to play their game. I was here to win. The negotiations started, but they were anything but civil. The board tried to push for more control, trying to chip away at the terms Marcus and I had already agreed upon. But I wasn't backing down. Every time they tried to shift the conversation, I countered. Every question they asked, I had an answer for. They couldn't touch me. I knew this deal better than they did. And I was going to make sure they understood that. Cassidy wasn't in the room. But I could almost feel her presence. Looming outside. She thought she could play the role of the corporate queen. But what she didn't understand was that her reign was over. And I had already claimed the throne. As the meeting dragged on, I could feel the board starting to crack. The pressure was getting to them. They could sense the shift, the realization that they were losing control. And they were scared. It wasn't until the end of the meeting, when they finally relented and accepted the terms, that I allowed myself a moment to breathe. It was done. We had won. But as I stood up to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Cassidy had made a mistake by underestimating me. And as I walked out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. The real battle was still ahead, and I was ready for it. Cassidy would soon learn that the game she thought she was playing wasn't one she could win. The next morning, I walked into the Sterling Hart building with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The usual hustle and bustle of the office had taken on a different tone. Whispers followed me down the hallway, but I didn't care. I had made my move, and now, I was about to watch the results unfold. The conference room doors swung open, and the boardroom fell silent. I could sense their fear, but they were too proud to show it openly. They had been scrambling for days, trying to fix the mess Cassidy had made. But they had no idea how deep it ran, or how far I had gone to ensure the deal would close on my terms. I sat at the table, Marcus beside me. The weight of the room pressing in from all sides. The board members were sitting across from us, their faces a mix of anxiety and frustration. Cassidy wasn't here, I'd made sure of that. She didn't belong in this room anymore. She had lost the right to sit at the table the moment she thought she could control me. "Let's get to it," I said, my voice steady and measured. "We all know what's at stake here. The merger is happening, and it's happening on our terms." I didn't wait for them to respond. They had no power left to challenge me. One of the senior board members, Robert, cleared his throat. "Emily, we understand the terms you've laid out, but we're still trying to process the impact of all these changes." "The board isn't happy with Robert," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "The board can either accept these changes, or we walk away from this deal. You don't have a choice." "You never did." The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Robert's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I could feel the shift in the room. The realization settling in, that they had no leverage left. "The terms we agreed on are final," I continued, glancing at Marcus for confirmation. He gave a subtle nod. The kind of silent approval that made the weight of my words feel even more final. If you want this deal, you will accept the revised terms. And you will do it now. A few more minutes of silence passed, and I could see the board members exchange uneasy looks. But none of them spoke. They knew they had no ground to stand on anymore. I wasn't negotiating. I was dictating terms, and they had to either accept it or face the consequences. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "We'll accept the terms. The merger will proceed." I nodded, satisfaction flooding through me. It had been easy, almost too easy. Cassidy had thought she could push me out. But she had underestimated everything I was capable of. She didn't know the first thing about true power. She had tried to play the game, but she had no idea how to win. "Good," I said, standing up. "Let's make sure we get this right. There's a lot riding on it." As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but something else, too. A feeling I hadn't experienced in years. It was the thrill of victory. But more than that, it was the realization that I had finally reclaimed what was mine. The moment I stepped into the elevator, I allowed myself a brief smile. It wasn't a smile of joy. It wasn't one of celebration. It was the smile of someone who had taken back control, someone who had fought and won. The game had changed. And I had made sure I was the one calling the shots. I walked into my office, the familiar hum of the building around me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. The chaos had passed, and now, there was nothing left but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had won. The door to my office closed behind me, and I sat down at my desk. My fingers hovered over the papers in front of me. The merger was done. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I reached for my phone. And as I dialed the number I knew by heart, I could already feel the next steps falling into place. The Sterling family had no idea how much I had already changed the game, how much I had already set in motion. The message from Marcus was still fresh in my mind. "We're not done yet. You're just getting started." I had always been one step ahead. And now, I was about to take that next step. The phone rang, and when the familiar voice on the other end answered, I knew that everything had shifted. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm, but carrying the weight of everything that had happened. "It's time to move forward. Let's finish this." The moment felt significant, like a door closing on the past and another, one opening wide to the future. The journey had been long, and the road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear: I had come out on top. And no one, not Cassidy, not the board, no one could take that from me.